Hello and welcome to an adventure. I think we're good this time. Hi Key Squared, thank you so much for the resubscription and the heads up that the camera was live rather than the starting screen. I got in the room and things were not set up the way they normally are, and I was having to run around and try and, is this the right cable that goes here? And then the computer didn't want to connect to the internet. So I had a couple of technical issues getting everything up and running today. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for the help. And hello, Hannah. So hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully you've got some nice chill piano in the background and we can have a wonderful Archival adventure. Hi, Fludan. Yeah. I got a picture up on the one computer and I was like, oh, that's me moving around. That's not supposed to be me moving around. That was when I saw your note. So anyway, welcome to an adventure. This is Archival Adventures here at Virginia Tech University Libraries. I am Anthony Wright Day Hernandez, the Special Collection, or the Community Collections Archivist in Special Collections and University Archives. And this is the show where I show off things from our collections and we look at them together and learn something, ideally. Oftentimes I learn things, so I hope that you do. And hopefully what you learn is not just what technical difficulties look like. Anyway, as always, I'm going to start off by reading the land and labor acknowledgement for Virginia Tech. And then we will take a look at what collection we're looking at today, read a bit about it, and then start looking at the materials. So let's start with this. Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutelo and Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationships with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that legislation and practices like the Morrill Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands, both locally and in Western territories. We understand that honoring Native peoples without explicit material commitments falls short of our institutional responsibilities. Through sustained, transparent, and meaningful engagement with the Tutelo and Monacan peoples and other Native nations, we commit to changing the trajectory of Virginia Tech's history by increasing Indigenous student, staff, and faculty recruitment and retention, diversifying course offerings, and meeting the growing needs of all Virginia tribes and supporting their sovereignty. We must also acknowledge that enslaved Black people generated revenue and resources used to establish Virginia Tech and were prohibited from attending until 1953. Through Inclusive VT, the institutional and individual commitment to Ut Prosim that I may serve, in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. Thank you. So today's collection is going to be the Otis Jerome Parker Papers. So this is some papers from a NASA engineer who was involved in creating self-propulsion units for extravehicular activity, notably jet shoes, which you may have heard something about at one point in time. I did see there was at least one blog out there talking about NASA's development of jet shoes. And so, yeah, we're going to be looking at that. Key Squared, it's good to know. I've had a number of people comment that they're happy that I do read that every time. So yeah, thank you for the feedback on that. Technical difficulties are how we learn things. Indeed, indeed, indeed. And yes, today's topic is engineering. Also, just if you're unfamiliar, I don't know who else here, I do stream this show to two Twitch channels. And getting captions working on both of them requires me to have two computers because the captioner will only pull or will only transmit to one channel per input mic. And anyway, getting it working, I have it on two computers, which also means I have chat for one channel on my left and chat for the other channel on my right. So if you see me looking back and forth, or if I'm giving all my attention one direction and I'm neglecting the other chat, shout at me, someone. Because I would really like to pay attention to both. And we did just get a raid. So let me... 16-bit Eric, thank you so much for bringing the whimsies over, all 44 of you. Welcome in, whimsies. This is Archival Adventures. This is my once weekly show on Wednesdays where I show off materials from the archives and special collections at Virginia Tech. This week we are looking at the Otis Jerome Parker Papers. And I'd be happy to tell you a little bit about Otis Jerome Parker. Let me just get up a short little description that I can read to you about who he is. He's a NASA engineer that was responsible for developing self-propulsion units for extravehicular activity. And I can actually even drop a link directly to this information in the chat if I can actually just clip this URL down. And but hi and welcome. I hope that you all had fun over at Eric's stream. I know that Eric ended by talking about Changeling the Dreaming, which is a lovely TTRPG that hopefully you learned a little bit about. I know I did. And I'm just grabbing the link for the other chat as well, because I am streaming to 2 channels at the moment. But welcome in. Feel free to drop in chat and tell me how your week is going. It is Wednesday, so we're halfway through. Just 1 second while I grab this link for this chat. I should have had this prepared in advance, but if you were here at the beginning, you know that I was not exactly prepared when we went live. So there is the link for the other chat to the finding aid, which gives descriptive information about what we're going to be looking at today. Hi, Rangitis. Welcome in. Otis Jerome Parker. Born in 1918, died in 1995, he was an aerospace engineer, was employed by NASA's Langley Research Center during the 1960s and 1970s. He worked in the Flight Vehicles and Systems Division during the Gemini program and was named assistant manager of Langley's Apollo Applications Program Experiments Systems in 1969. In 1971, he was assigned to the same position in the Skylab program. Parker was largely involved with the design and development of jet shoes. Yes, that is jet shoes, as in worn on your feet, and other devices intended to provide maneuverability during astronauts' extravehicular activity in spaceflight. During his work at NASA, Parker was granted patents as inventor or co-inventor of a design weight release mechanism, a spacecraft separation system, an ullage compensator, and a flared tube strainer. So the collection that we have consists mainly of photocopied materials. We don't have originals of them, but I thought that the topic of jet shoes was interesting enough that photocopies were okay, as well as some original photographs. So I thought that this sounded really interesting. We don't typically accept a lot of photocopied materials today unless they're just part of a larger collection. Looks like this collection was processed in 1987, so sometime in 87 or before, their practice was apparently different and they accepted more photocopied materials, but that's okay because they're quite interesting materials and we're going to enjoy looking at them anyway. So I'm just going to dive right in and we're going to start taking a look at things. I think we start with the pictures and then we go and read about whatever's in here. All I know is that there's supposed to be something in here about jet shoes, which I find fascinating. So let me switch so that you can see what's on the table in front of me. And we have folder number 1. in the Otis Jerome Parker Papers, photographs 1967 to 1971. This is actually, sorry, folder 7, not folder 1. And because there are some original photographs in here, I'm actually going to put on the gloves, or at least one glove. We've had the talk about archives and gloves before. Generally documents, we don't wear them here, but photographs we do, because it's all about mitigating damage to the materials. And with a lot of documents, especially older paper, they start to fray around the edges and get fragile, and cotton gloves like this especially reduce your manual dexterity and can catch on the edges and tear the paper, where the oils on your hands, especially if your hands are clean, are going to do less damage than a potential tear would. The flip side of that is photographs. The chemical composition of the photograph itself, the oils on your hand can discolor and erode that over time. So we don't want to get the oils on your hand onto the photograph. So especially if it's in good condition and you're not going to catch edges with it, it's better to handle a photograph with gloves. If it is fraying around the edges and you don't want to touch it with your fingers, that's when you need to get something like tweezers or something like that to actually manipulate it without touching it with your hands at all. So this photograph may actually be the only non-photocopied item in the collection. I'm not certain. I'm going to try and take it out of the plastic, or the mylar, so that you can see it directly, hopefully with less glare. I don't know specifically what propulsion device he is sitting on here, but this is Otis Jerome Parker. And as you can see, this looks like some sort, it almost looks like a stationary bike, only without like the front wheel portion of it, and standing up taller than you would typically do on a stationary bike. It does not look comfortable. But his feet are strapped in here. It looks like maybe it's designed for his feet to go up and down. I'm not certain what that's about, whether that's supposed to provide motive power of some sort or not. There do to appear to be hoses going to his feet. It's possible that this is the jet shoes and that this is a testing stand. That is entirely possible. And hopefully we will discover that as we go. I don't know. But it is quite a unique photograph. You can see there's this frame on the back with sort of a yellow bubble here of some sort of instrumentation. Whatever the stand is that he's on, it's got handles for him, and this, yeah, I'm uncertain. No, that's all I've got to go on right now as well, Key Squared, and hopefully when we look through the documents, we might get a better sense of what this is. It is an official NASA image, and so I know from the back, I'm not sure how well you can see, this is NASA 71951L, and all official NASA images from that era had an identifier number on them and typically had pre-written caption text that was released to the media along with the image. I don't have a copy of the caption text to accompany this image, and I have not been able to locate caption text by using the identifier number for the image, so I don't know what the official caption for this image was. I do know that typically with these media images from NASA, there was an official caption. I just don't know what it is. Jet shoes just sound like a terrible accident waiting to happen. The picture doesn't help either. Yeah, NASA was all in on jet shoes for a while. They were looking for good ways to propel astronauts during EVA. So outside the spacecraft while in space. I think back-mounted jetpacks is what they ended up going with. with hand controls where they can do short little bursts of propellant to alter their trajectory in different ways. And that's what we typically see depicted in movies, but apparently they did significant research into jet shoes as well as other self-propulsion mechanisms. And Otis Jerome Parker was involved in that experimentation or that engineering development. I'll put this back in the Mylar later because that is slightly more complicated than I want to do on camera. So we've got additional photographs. Again, a lot of this is photocopied, but we can get, the informational content is what we're interested in, at least for this show. I think that's just Otis. I don't know what he's doing there. This is NASA L67-6332. Jetpacks seem only slightly safer than jet shoes. Yeah, I agree. We can get a look at that same contraption, but without a person. So same device. It looks like it's closed down a bit here because this part was turned 90 degrees when it was on his back. But that is the same stand that he was sitting on or standing on. Don't know. It looks even more likely to explode when no one is standing on it. Yeah, it definitely does not look comfortable or normal. Although it looks less scary when you see somebody in an actual EVA suit on it. So this astronaut here who's in the full big white EVA suit, it doesn't look as frightening with that suit as it did with the orange sort of test suit. And we have a lovely illustration here for jet shoes. Oh, here, let's look at this one first. Proposed jet shoes experiment in EVA for Apollo applications program. And you can see a cutaway of the inside of a very open space. I don't think any spacecraft was ever built with this much of an uncluttered open space inside. But there's a tiny little person here holding something with little jets of propulsion coming out of his shoes. With the suit, it looks like it belongs in space and not nearly as explosive prone. Yeah. And this is a little bit more of a close-up view of what we were just looking at. This is a very like 1960s view of what a spacecraft interior would be like. Or 70s a bit. I would expect something like this illustration, the aesthetic of it, to show up in something like 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's this large open space that this astronaut is propelling himself through using the jet shoes. And I do say him because at the time it was just men. It looks like he's holding like an oxygen bottle or something. But look at the little cluster of just lamps on the wall. They're just like incandescent lamps, like a lighting fixture that you would find in a home of the 60s or 70s, just on the wall, which we know from actual experience and actual documented evidence and history, there are no large open spaces like this inside spacecraft. Space is a premium. And they don't have like lighting fixtures like you would have had on the wall in a 1960s kitchenette. But it makes for an interesting illustration. And it would have been a very different aesthetic for space if that had been reality. It definitely looks like an illustration from someone who had no actual science or engineering background. Indeed. But the thing is, NASA hired people with vision, and NASA hires a lot of artists to do artist conceptions of things. It's more about communicating an idea to the public than it is necessarily about accuracy. They do some hard science illustration and some actual like explanatory science illustration and art. And I think we looked at some of that a few weeks ago. But a lot of times it's conceptual art. It is meant to evoke, it's meant to inspire, it's meant to suggest a concept or communicate an idea, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% accurate. So here they're trying to get people inspired and interested in rocket shoes, and this illustration, I think, does that job fairly well. I'll try and zoom in and see if you can see a little bit more of the detail of the actual jets that are coming out of the feet. They are not the easiest to make out, but I don't know. I'm gonna try and get it so that maybe you can see them. Just focus. Because in where I'm looking at it, you can definitely see, and it just, the camera isn't doing a good job of picking it up, but there's definitely like smoke coming out of his feet. And you just can't really see it that well on camera. Yeah, it is a cool illustration. I'm gonna zoom back out now because showing off the smoke to you on the camera, oh, there you can see it kind of. Just like this cloud of smoke that's coming out of his feet. It definitely doesn't translate as well on camera. And I'm sure in the original photograph, it probably would have read a lot easier because it probably would have been in color. But this is what we have. So, and then we have a different angle of the same photo of Parker on this contraption. With the little backpack unit, with whatever this globe is. I'm guessing that's propellant of some sort. But the hose goes from that and connects into the seat that he's on. So I don't know if like the actual like base that he's sitting on is part of it. It sure seems like maybe it is. But we have documents to look at that will hopefully give us answers to some of the questions we have about these illustrations. My guess, just based on the description that went along with this collection, is that these probably are illustrations of the jet shoes, because it made a big deal about jet shoes. So let's see what we've got document-wise. The first folder is a simple solar orientation control system for space vehicles. September 1962. And so this is a technical note. This is a photocopy of the author's personal copy. I don't know. Let me look and see, where did we get this collection? Because I don't actually know. All we know is that it was donated to us in 1987. I don't know who they were donated by. That information is probably available somewhere in our database, but I don't have it readily available. So we have an author's personal copy here of Technical Note D1271, a simple solar orientation control system for space vehicles, by Seymour Salmiers, S. Lawrence Kessler, and Otis J. Parker from Langley Research Center in Langley Station, Hampton, Virginia. September 1962. So let's see what this gives us. A control system for solar orientation of space vehicles has been designed and examined on a single degree of freedom air-bearing platform. I'm not certain exactly what that means. Single degree of freedom air-bearing platform. That seems to me it's some sort of test vehicle that only allows certain parameters to change. That would be my guess as to the single degree of freedom. Air-bearing platform, I'm guessing, is technical terminology for something that's not actually in space, but I don't know. That's entirely speculation on my part. I would have to do some research and discover exactly what that terminology meant to know exactly how it was tested, but this is apparently a summary talking about how this was tested. The response of the system to various initial errors was measured, and phase plane diagrams of the system performance are presented. Methods of applying control torques are considered, and the application of artificial damping through the proper use of control torques is investigated. The results show that simplicity may be obtained with the use of reaction jets. It was found that the current system, while suitable for vertical probes, would consume excessive fuel for consideration in satellite vehicles. Calculations based on improvements in the system that are thought to be reasonably achievable indicate that a cold gas control system may be attractive for certain solar power collecting missions. It appears possible to construct a system requiring 2.57 pounds of fuel per axis to control a satellite having inertia of 100 slug feet per second to an accuracy of 0.5 degrees for 1 year. That's a lot of numbers. 2.57 pounds of fuel per axis to control a satellite of certain inertia to a given set of accuracy. Okay. The system tested was found to be capable of pointing accuracies of plus or minus 18 arcs of second. Possible improvements could increase the accuracy to 0.1 second of arc without regard to fuel consumption. However, even with extreme improvements in system performance, it is shown that fuel requirements with a cold gas system render the system impractical for orbital use at these accuracies. The stable air-bearing design was evolved which successfully simulated the friction-free space environment. You know, for optical mounts, single degrees of freedom usually means it can only pivot along one axis. Yeah, I think that was, I may not have explained it well, but I think that was kind of what my interpretation of what that terminology meant. That would be my guess as to how the term is being used. Air bearings. The pivoting part floats on a cushion of compressed air like a tiny hovercraft. So there's very little friction. It's sometimes used for high-precision gyroscopes. Thank you, Key Squared, for being knowledgeable about this and being willing to share your knowledge. That is really good information to know. So this is a solar orientation control system for space vehicles. Essentially, it's a summary, technical note about a system that will allow space vehicles to know where they are in relation to the sun. And we get information about that. We know that because the introduction here, this is the only time your useless trivia is actually relevant. I'm sure that's not true, but satellites or vehicles operating in interplanetary space will in many instances require accurate information concerning the sun's direction from the vehicle. In some cases, orientation of the vehicle toward the sun is necessary and desirable. References 1 and 2 describe some of these requirements and methods of achieving them. For example, solar orientation can be used for the following purposes: thermal balance, collection and utilization of the radiated energy from the sun, interplanetary navigation reference point, investigation of solar properties, reference for astronomical telescopic observations. So they give 5 different examples of why a space vehicle would need to know where it is in relation to the sun. The first, thermal balance. So whichever side is facing the sun is going to be much, much hotter than the side facing away from the sun. So if it knows where the sun is, it can rotate to balance the temperatures and prevent certain areas from getting overheated or overchilled. So that is my interpretation of thermal balance as a reason for why a satellite needs to be able to find where the sun is. Collection and utilization of the radiated energy of the sun. Solar panels. They need to be able to orient the solar panels properly to be able to collect the rays of the sun in order to power the unit. Interplanetary navigation reference point. If you know where the sun is, you can calculate where other things are. Because it is, for our purposes in spaceflight, one of the large navigational reference points. Investigation of solar properties. Hey, if you want to study the sun, you need to know where it is. A reference for astronomical telescopic observations. So if you want to look at certain things at a far distance in the universe, knowing where the sun is will help you plot where those things are. So again, a navigational reference. Oh, hi, Lord Portico! It is good to see you today. This investigation deals with some preliminary experimental results obtained with a mock-up of a single degree of freedom solar orientation control system. The system was mounted on an air bearing to simulate the friction-free space environment. So that's confirmation key squared that the air bearing that they're referring to here is the type that you are aware of. Emphasis was placed on simplicity in the effort to obtain long-term reliability. Methods of applying control torques were considered, and the application of artificial damping by the proper use of control torques was investigated. The use of a simple gas reaction jet control system in the space environment was considered. The response of the system to various initial errors in the range of 0.5 to 90 degrees was recorded, and the system time delays were measured. Okay. The most important single consideration in any space vehicle operation is its reliability. Other aspects of the control system design must necessarily be subjugated to this primary factor if long-time operation is intended. As a consequence, less emphasis has been placed on such important problems as weight and power consumption than might have been the case had the maintenance of the equipment in space been a simple matter. Since the essence of reliability is simplicity, it is possible to achieve low weight and low power consumption by holding the system to a very few parts. Make things simple. The less moving parts, the more reliable it's going to be over time. Reliability is key if you want it to work for a long time in space, which you do because you put it up there to do something and it costs a lot to put it there. Makes sense to me. Let's see what else we can learn. So I'm guessing there was mention in the finding aid that he had a patent for a system of this type. Patent says inventor or co-inventor of a D-spin weight release mechanism, a spacecraft separation system, an ullage compensator, and a flared tube strainer. None of which is this. So I don't know, but it's fascinating. I like the introduction so far. Let's see what... Ooh. I think I may have just given myself a paper cut. I'm uncertain. It's possible I did, it's possible I didn't. It is a hazard of the trade when you work in archives. The poor captions have no idea how to handle ullage. Key squared, I don't have any idea what ullage is. And when I first saw it, I assumed it needed an H in front of it. If you would, if you're knowledgeable about it and want to share what ullage is, that is U-L-L-A-G-E, I would be interested in learning because I have no idea. It's something that I would need to look up. The next folder that we have here is a flight investigation of a solar orientation control system for spacecraft, 1964. We might come back to this. This looks like a 2-year supplement on the report that we were just looking at. Ullage is the technical term for the gradual reduction in volume or weight of a tank. That would be very important for calculating the weight of, the fuel. Thank you. Like how the center of mass of your fuel tank changes as you use it up. That would be quite a thing that they have to pay a lot of attention to at NASA. Program Management Report, Apollo Applications Programs. March 24th, 1967. I think we'll look at this one next because it sounds interesting. Not that the flight integration or flight investigation of a solar orientation control system for spacecraft doesn't sound interesting. It's just that that's sort of what we were just looking at, and I'd like to look at something else for a few minutes. So an ullage compensator is what keeps the rocket from tipping over in flight because the tank got empty at one end. Excellent. It's so good to have you here because I love that whatever topic I pick, somebody in chat knows something about it and is able to provide context or specifics about what we're looking at. Because most of the time, I don't have that context or specifics. I'm knowledgeable about certain topics. One being speculative fiction, especially from the 1980s and 1990s speculative fiction, less so the 70s and before, less so like the 20 teens and onward. So there's a narrow period where I'm pretty knowledgeable about speculative fiction. I'm somewhat knowledgeable about LGBTQ plus history and can provide context and analysis on that. And then, there are some other things like how to bake a pie. I know a bit about that. But when it gets to these really technical, hard science facts, I find them fascinating, but I don't know enough about them to be able to explain them to other people. So I really appreciate when there are people in chat that are knowledgeable and can share that knowledge to explain the things that we're encountering in the collections. Barring that, if we found the topic interesting enough, I would look it up and happily we would explore together. But I really do enjoy the context. So thank you very much, Key Squared. So here we have a program management report for the Apollo Applications Program, March 24th, 1967. One fun thing about the fact that these are NASA reports is that they are public information and I'm free to read them even though they are relatively new. Some of the things that we look at, especially when it gets into like the pulp fiction stuff, the pulp sci-fi stuff that we have, I can't actually read entire stories because they're covered under copyright. And while educational use and commentary about it and stuff like that, there's probably an argument to be made for fair use. To be on the safe side, we try not to just share the entire contents of stuff like that. If it's old enough, I can read an entire story or something like that. If it's if it's older than 1923, then I'm safe. But newer than that, we're leery about. But because these are public documents that were produced by the United States government, they are owned by the people of the United States, and I'm free to read them. Unless they were classified, but any of the NASA stuff in our archives has already been declassified, so has been roused by something. Yeah, Portico, sorry, I was mentioning copyright, which will come into play next week on stream, but only slightly. Summary outlook. Oxygen regeneration is a critical operation in closed-loop environmental control systems for sustaining human life in long-term flights of manned spacecraft. Sorry. As a science fiction buff, as somebody who enjoys speculative fiction and really enjoys some great hard sci-fi like Kim Stanley Robinson, the Mars trilogy from Kim Stanley Robinson is spectacular as far as like hard sci-fi goes, and honestly, surprisingly stands up really well to this day in describing what a potential journey to Mars to colonize the planet would look like. Just the mention here of a closed-loop environmental control system for sustaining human life in long-term flights of manned spacecraft, and like the fact that you have to be able to reproduce oxygen, you need a closed system where you're not losing resources and they're automatically recycling themselves, which is almost impossible to achieve in a human-made vessel. Sorry, I'm just, woo! What? Coffee where art is paid for? I don't understand what you are getting at, Lord Portico, but sure. Electrolysis cells are a necessary part of such a system. These cells have proven to be reasonably efficient during ground operation, but their behavior in a zero-G environment has not been investigated. The objective of this flight experiment program is to expose the cell to a zero-G environment for a sufficient period of time to reach equilibrium conditions. The behavior of the unit, especially in those areas which are normally gravity dependent, will be studied. All right, so this is describing the electrolysis cell experiment where they are going to expose an electrolysis cell, which is necessary to the closed loop oxygen regeneration. They're going to expose it to less gravity in order to determine whether it continues to function the way that it is expected to in a low grav or no grav environment. Oh, copyright. You thought I said coffee rights? Nope, copyright. A contract was let to TRW Incorporated in January 1965 to build a qualification unit. The test unit was completed in November 1966 with LRC in-house testing commencing mid-January 1967. This testing will include bench test unit qualification scheduled to be complete in April. Environmental testing is scheduled for May, and vibration testing is scheduled for June 1967. Upon completion of qualification testing, an integration study to adapt unit to existing hardware will begin. Launch readiness for the flight unit is scheduled for June 1968. So they were looking at 15 months of testing and development time in order to determine that everything was going to work properly. And actually 15 months from the time of this report. They actually started in mid-January, so 18 months of development time in order to prepare for launch readiness in June of 1968. So let's see. Here is a chart that if we took the time to study, we could probably get some useful information out of. But right now, just looks meaningless to me. It appears to be an engineering report. It does appear to be giving consistent results, whatever those results may be. March, there was a value of 1. April, a value of 1. May, a value of 1. June, they estimated 1, but apparently the value was 40. And then from September through June of the next year, the value was 40. I don't know what the value means. I don't know what this report is trying to tell us. This is the, I don't know. I'm looking for a title. I think this may be I'm not certain. It doesn't actually say anywhere. It's obligations and costs. This is the electrolysis. Oh, it's project financial status. I don't know what the 1s and 40s mean. It's the financial status, though. Oh. Yay. This is project planning. This would be, I believe, if I'm not getting my vocabulary mixed up, a Gantt chart. Callback, TRW Inc.'s other projects included the Compton and Chandra space telescopes, which we looked at a couple weeks ago. A Gantt chart. So this is a Gantt chart. It is a project planning tool that lists, so you've got the different items in the project over here on the left. You have a breakdown here. So this is calendar year 1966, calendar year 1967, and calendar year 1968. And they're just breaking things down into months. So here, this LRC in-house testing was scheduled to begin in January of 1967. And as you can see, part of the bar here, part of the white bar has been filled in. That's because it actually did begin, and they started working on it in January of 1967. This report is near the end of March of 1967, so it's filled into that point because that activity has been going on for that period of time. After that, it's all speculation. You have bench test unit qualification, environmental test, and vibration test that are listed as reliant or as aspects of the LRC in-house testing. The bench test qualification is scheduled to begin in April, environmental test in May, and vibration test in June. But I guess they had not begun up to this point. And then the integration study is actually scheduled, it's dependent on completion of the LRC in-house testing. So it is scheduled here, and if you move the end of LRC in-house testing, it will move the beginning of the integration study. And there's a defined period of time that the integration study is expected to take, and other dependent milestones are subsequent to that. So if you move these, they'll shift to other things, and basically it's just a way of seeing the different project points and dependencies and how much time they're supposed to take and what's dependent on what's actually in progress. It's quite a commonly used project planning type document, and if you have the project planning skills and sort of technical mind to be able to break out a task into its component parts and chart them out like this, it can be really a helpful thing. Not everybody can do it, and not everybody can do it well, but it is a tool designed for a purpose, and this is a relatively simple example of one. You keep thinking Gantt sounds like it should be the name of a fantasy villain in spiky armor. Key squared, every time I see the words Gantt chart, I think of the shark alien that was one of the bad guys in Disney's Lilo and Stitch. Every time. I don't remember what the character's actual name is, but every time I see Gantt chart, I think of the hammerhead shark alien villain from Lilo and Stitch. JASO and Gantt shall destroy your mighty works. Now I have to look. Not that one. Gantu. He's not a hammerhead, he's just a shark, but that must be why I think of him when I see the name Gantt chart, because his name was Gantu. Yeah, his name is Gantu. So in my brain, an alien shark from a Disney cartoon created project planning tools known as Gantt charts. Headcanon in place. Next we have the Apollo Applications Program Primates Long Duration in Zero-G Experiment Definition. So this is a project. This is a project status as of March 24th, 1967, approved by Dr. F.L. Thompson, accomplishment responsibility Robert Bruce, which is a name I recognize from history, but have no association as to why I recognize Robert Bruce from history. But note to any of your D&D players watching this, pretend you never saw this conversation. Oh dear, key squared. So let's read about what this project was. The objective of Phase 1 of this project is to perform feasibility and preliminary design studies of a spacecraft suitable for obtaining physiological and performance data on a higher-order mammalian system in zero-gravity space environment for duration of up to 1 year. Plan for a general-based laboratory test model will also be defined. Results will aid in definition of a specific flight mission. 2 parallel contracts have been awarded for the preliminary design of the Primate spacecraft, containing all required systems for operation of the spacecraft. Life support of 2 or more small primates in unattended Earth orbit for periods of up to 1 year, and recovery of the primates. So they wanted to send a couple of monkeys into space with no humans, keep them alive, and bring them back. The 2 contacts are Northrop Corporation, awarded February 27, 1967 for $260,500, and Lockheed Aircraft Company, contract awarded March 14, 1967 for $212,750. Both of those companies are still major aerospace contractors in the United States, the first being known as Northrop Grumman, and the second being Lockheed Martin. Specifications for a ground-based laboratory test model to support a flight mission of this type will also be developed. A meeting was held on March 14, 1967, with various interested parties to select species of macaque monkey. The rhesus species was selected, and 2 monkeys will be used in the experiment. Northrop is preparing a complete list of mission requirements and design criteria. There will be a review of this material at Northrop during early April. Lockheed has requested a meeting within 2 weeks of their contract go-ahead to review and definitize some of the RFP requirements. RFP is an abbreviation for Request for Proposal, which in any sort of product or project development framework is a call that goes out to ask interested parties to submit their proposal for how to solve the problem that you are outsourcing solutions for. So RFP is just an abbreviation that gets used in lots of different industries to mean request for proposal. And so macaque monkeys, I just want to check one thing. So macaques and rhesus monkeys in particular are commonly used in lab experimentation, and just off the top of my head when I read it, I was like, oh, those are the kind of monkeys that that were being used or were housed at a warehouse in Reston, Virginia, and when the Ebola Reston strain was discovered. Which is just a thing that sticks in my head. It was the one fact about rhesus macaques that I could think of. Incidentally, if you want to know more about that, and I will warn you, there is some graphic content. It is the only book that I have ever read that caused me to physically get ill. only it was just a very brief portion of the book, and it is a very, very well-written narrative nonfiction book. The Hot Zone is a good read. I do see the Hydrate, Redeem Lord Portico. I will do so. Monkeys in space! What about the King of Scotland? Key squared, I'm not sure what King of Scotland... Oh, Robert Bruce. Thank you. Okay. I don't think this is the same Robert Bruce. Anyway, so now I've given you a book recommendation. If you are at all interested in virology or the Ebola virus, and in particular the Ebola restin, which is a non-lethal form that is very closely related to Ebola Zaire, which is a highly deadly form. It's an interesting read. It struck me rather personally because the monkey warehouse that the narrative centers around was literally across the street from the building my mom worked in at the time. Slaps an NDA on Key Squared's D&D players. Yeah, we'll just pretend that you haven't heard anything that I'm talking about if you're in Key Squared's D&D campaign. LRC. I don't know what LRC is an abbreviation for. LRC has been requested by OART to evaluate the needs and costs of including subsystem and/or system breadboard testing to the current study contracts. This is to be done by contract change notification. Limited evaluation indicates that if a flight is planned for 1970, some hardware testing should start as soon as possible. It should take the form of selected subsystem evaluation tests, such as waste management, feeding, and biomedical sensor subsystems. This could then be followed by a breadboard laboratory demonstration test. That paragraph had very little meaning for me, and I would have to look up what some of those things are in order to understand this document fully. I have no idea what a breadboard test is. Thank you, Key Squared, LRC being Langley Research Center, which makes perfect sense. And one would think I would have gotten it, but I didn't. If you were somebody who was specifically researching NASA programs of the time, and like if I was researching this, I would have eventually figured that out. But I think there are two more experiments that are described in this item here. We have Apollo Applications Program Vehicle Disturbances Experiment. Preliminary studies of the subsystem requirements for manned spacecraft indicate that vehicle motions resulting from crew movements can impose severe demands on the spacecraft's stability and control systems. You don't want to move about inside the cabin because you're going to break the ship if you do. Well, that's not great. Fine accuracy experiments, such as the Apollo telescope mount, may require the restriction of crew motions. So they're saying certain experiments, crew might just have to sit really still while the experiment is going on, or they'll mess up the experiment. Or their isolation from the experiments, meaning physically separating them from the superstructure that supports the experiment itself. So that would be, you've got the experiment, it's set up in Module A. All the astronauts get into Module B and disconnect Module B from Module A so that they are physically detached, so that any movements that the astronauts make do not disturb the experiment in Module A. Makes a lot of logical sense, especially for fine calibration experiments. Because of future stability demands, a knowledge of the variation and average of maximum levels of crew disturbance torques is essential. So they're wanting to test how much crew moving about actually causes vibration or movement in the structures of the space vehicles. so that they're able to determine which experiments need to be separated from the astronauts in order to be conducted efficiently. The purpose of this experiment is to determine the effects of crew motion disturbances on the uncontrolled and controlled motions of manned spacecraft. The Phase 1 definition contract for $50,000 was awarded to Martin Company, which would be the other half of the merged modern-day Lockheed Martin, in September 1966. The experiment is presently in the definition phase, with the final report from Martin Company expected by the end of March 1967. Ooh, breadboarding is building a prototype of a circuit or system on an open platform for testing, like if you spread all the parts out on a kitchen cutting board rather than having them all inside a case where you can't see what they're doing. That makes perfect sense once you describe it. And the thing that first came to mind when you were describing it, like I understand kind of the visual of how you're describing it, but my brain immediately went to modern sci-fi movies where they have a holographic interface and they can just make a gesture and have a 3D image hologram of an item break apart into its component parts so that they're all spread out. Is that sort of an accurate image of like having all the items spread out across a plane so that you can look at them? That is where my brain went with what you were describing. I don't know if it's fully accurate, but that I went straight to like those holographic representations in movies of where they took the solid item and broke it apart into its component pieces to see. And yes, okay, so that is an accurate sort of illustration of what that is like. Cool. Originally, they literally did build them on wooden cutting boards since they were cheap and easy to get in bulk. That is awesome. I love that you have this knowledge. It's very helpful. All right, jet shoes experiment. We are here. Dr. F.L. Thompson and accomplishment responsibility, Otis Parker. Lord Portico's ancient memories of breadboarding circuits is stirred. So I don't think I have ever done anything quite like that, except for when I worked in a telecom company and actually like got the components for the engineers. I did materials management and like would actually do the picking of the components for the engineers and deliver them to them, but I never saw them like laid out. I just had a bucket full of all the components. But when I do cooking, I do something similar. I do mise en place. In order to prepare for cooking or baking, I get all of the ingredients together, measured into their appropriate quantities, and laid out before me before I ever start putting it together. It can be a lot of fun, especially the burning smells. All right, we have jet shoes though. This is the first, unless those images were of jet shoes, this is the first time we've come across an actual document related to jet shoes on the stream today. Cool, so pretty much the same thing as mise en place in cooking. That is, yeah, that's cool. Apollo Applications Program Jet Shoes Experiment. The increased importance of extravehicular activity in space operations makes desirable the development of a device for EVA that provides a high degree of mobility for the astronaut, does not unduly restrict his actions, and is as simple and reliable as possible. The jet shoe concept shows promise of meeting many of these requirements. This concept involves placing jets on the soles of the shoes of the subject. These jets are activated on demand by depressing a toe switch, and the more or less instinctive movement of the feet and legs is used to direct the jets and so produce the desired changes in attitude and position. Oh my gosh, there are so many ways that this could go wrong, because in space, the slightest change in the angle of your leg or foot will send you off in a direction that you didn't necessarily intend, because we're not used to having motive direction coming from the bottom of our feet. Oh boy. I love this. Since the jets are directed and controlled by the feet, both hands are free for such other tasks as may be required. This seems like a skill that would require a lot of practice to master, and the only place you would effectively be able to practice it is in space. So I can immediately see reasons why this never became a reality. This is the bad Zoom. Wow. Okay. This experiment involves having the astronaut test subject perform a series of maneuvers in the SIVB workshop. I have no idea what that is. To demonstrate the feasibility of the use of the jet shoe concept for EVA. All right, I'm going to do a lookup. S-IVB workshop. The WET workshop is a space station made from spent liquid propellant rocket stage. Such a rocket stage contains 2 large airtight propellant tanks. It was realized that the larger tank could be retrofit into the living quarters of a space station, while the smaller one could be used for the storage of waste. A large rocket stage would... Okay. Nope, that is not what it is, because that says that as of today, one has never been built. Orbital Workshop Station, 1960s NASA program to create an embryonic space station in orbit using the spent SIVB rocket stage of a Saturn IB. Got it. The Skylab cluster was supposed to contain an SIVB orbital workshop. So essentially what they were saying, they were recommending that this project be tested in an SIVB workshop. And yes, Key Squared, it's the Saturn 4B workshop. My brain was not processing that that was a Roman numeral. But that is what this illustration is that we saw earlier. A spent rocket fuel container that would then be used for experimentation on something like the use of the jet shoes. And according to the Wikipedia page about the WET workshop, as it is referred to, one was never built. So they clearly didn't do that experiment. Right, okay, so the maneuvers will be performed first without a spacesuit in a shirt sleeve environment and later in a pressurized spacesuit to gain an idea of the influence of the restriction in mobility on the effectiveness of the jet shoes. The feasibility study was completed on March 24th, concluding that the jet shoe concept is worth investigating in the Saturn 4B workshop. The draft of the statement of work is currently in process and is expected to be completed by May 1st, 1967. Expected launch readiness date is June 1968. Launch readiness not of the shoes, but of the experiment. I do not know. So this is the budget, the financial status. And we've got 100. I don't know if that's like 100,000 or I don't know what units that's in. I just know it says 100. A bit more complicated experiment according to the Gantt chart. Feasibility study, design and fabrication of operational test hardware, simulation tests, public experimentation implementation plan, or publish, I'm not sure, a preliminary system design, prepare statement of work, determination and finding, mail request for proposals, receive proposals, contract negotiation and award, detail system designs, system procurement and fabrication, component qualification test, assemble mass mock-up, system qualification test, flight acceptance test, pre-delivery acceptance test, system delivery, suit integration, and training procedures. And they were hoping to have suit integration started at the end of 1967 and training procedures in place at the end of August 1967. Oh, and then we have astronaut training that was going to start in September of 1967. Integration with flight space capsule, I think, mass mock-up. Pre-installation acceptance test, install flight unit in spacecraft, launch readiness date, data acquisition and reduction, and publish final report. So by 1969, they wanted to have jet shoes in full operation. And we know it didn't happen. So it would appear that they did not, in fact, do this. Indeed, key squared, yeah. It's really cool, though. It's an interesting idea. And at the time, space was really new. And like thinking about, oh, let's put some propulsion on the bottom of their feet so that they can keep their hands free and they can just use their legs to direct where they're going. It seems naive when we look at it today, but at the time, their understanding of the actual motive mechanics of navigation through a void, like space, wasn't well known. They didn't have a lot of experience up there. They didn't have a ton of experience of exactly how sensitive bodies in space are to slight variations in the direction of motive thrust. So we can look at it today and immediately intuit that that's not going to work. That's going to send you off wildly careening in various directions as you try to get your legs to be still enough to have some sort of control over which direction you're moving with a constant jet or even an intermittent jet of force coming out of the bottom of your feet, which is not a piece of your anatomy that you're used to thinking about in regard to momentum and trajectory. The bottoms of your feet, like we think of side to side, up, down, front, back. Up, down is as close as you would get to there's propulsion coming from the bottoms of my feet, and where I move my feet determines which direction I go. And if your propulsion is coming from the back of your feet and you need to reverse course, what do? Because unless you have full body movement and are really limber, you're not going to be able to flip your feet around to start pushing you the other direction. You're going to have to do some sort of three-point turn at minimum. Like you're going to have to vector in order to get where you're wanting to go, which requires different sort of three-dimensional navigational positioning than we are intuitively designed to do, because we're used to having more of a generally two-dimensional conception of movement, given that there's always a down, which limits our range of motion. So the experiment actually talks about intuitive movement of the legs being used to help direct which direction you're going, except that it's not intuitive because it's a completely different form of propulsion and movement than we're used to as human beings, and would require a significant adjustment in a sort of reactionary response to environment. Like, it's a unique and interesting concept, and it's well defined and a really cool experiment that at the time they didn't have enough knowledge to know was going to utterly fail for the purposes that they were trying to use it for. I think it's really cool. It's why Iron Man put repulsors on his hands. Yeah. I really think this is a really cool item. And the experiment itself is a really neat idea that was doomed to fail, but for reasons that they were unaware of at the time that they were developing it, which I just think is really cool. Ooh, here we go. An entire item on jet shoes experiment in EVA. From the NASA Langley Research Center, April 10th, 1967. And honestly, like, from a fiction standpoint, jet shoes are amazing. If you're just playing like a role-playing game and your characters are in space or whatever, or you're writing a novel or designing a cartoon or anything like that, if you're telling stories, you don't have to strictly adhere to hard science and what is actually possible. And jet shoes are cool as heck, so use them. An outline of the proposed jet shoes experiment in extravehicular activity for the Apollo Applications Program by John D. Bird, Otis J. Parker, and David F. Thomas Jr., NASA Langley Research Center, Hampton, Virginia, April 10th, 1967. The objectives of this experiment are to determine the feasibility of the jet shoe concept for extravehicular space locomotion in future space operations, and to obtain engineering information to enable the design of more effective jet shoe hardware. The jet shoe concept involves placing jets on the soles of the boots of the subject. These jets are activated on demand by depressing a toe switch, and movement of the feet and legs is used to direct the jets and so produce the desired changes in attitude and position. This scheme has been found to be very effective in ground-based simulations where they've got lots of gravity. Future efforts in this area will involve the design and testing of jet shoes suitable for excursions outside of a spacecraft. These efforts will be substantially guided by the results of these initial experiments. With the increased importance of extravehicular activity in space operations, it becomes desirable to design a device for EVA that provides a high degree of mobility for the astronaut, does not unduly restrict his actions, and is as simple and reliable as possible. The jet shoe concept, as described for this experiment, shows promise of meeting many of these requirements. This concept makes use of the well-developed balance capability of the human body, utilized by the everyday activity of walking, to control jets attached to the soles of the shoes to produce the desired translations and rotations of the body necessary for extravehicular activity. I don't doubt that it would be possible for a human to learn how to navigate this way over time. I have a sense that it would have a similar learning curve to learning to ride a bicycle, and that once you picked it up, you would have the skill and be able to just like do it again at will. But I think that there would be a significant period of time where you just don't intuitively get it, and then eventually you do. And the problem with that is that the intuition would be different on the planet's surface than it would be in space. Regardless of whether you're practicing underwater with buoyancy or not, I think it would be different in space. And so therefore the only real way to accurately train that sort of balance mechanism to navigate in space would be to train in space, which requires you to send people up there and costs a lot of money. That's mostly speculation on my part, but based on what I know about propulsion and stuff like this, seems like it would be that way, but I could be wrong. It's possible they killed this project for other reasons. This mode of operation eliminates the necessity for stabilizing servo mechanisms in the EVA hardware. The fact that the jets are directed and controlled by the feet and not by the hands releases both hands for other such tasks as may be required. The utilization of only 2 jets for the entire locomotion process, rather than a greater number of jets as an orthogonal array makes the system, or jets in an orthogonal array makes the system simple in number of components and hence presumably more reliable. Which we did note in another report that simplicity and reliability go together really well. The work of Mr. Charles Zimmerman and Mr. Paul Hill and others on the flying platform has demonstrated man's inherent ability to control a thrust vector pushing against the soles of his feet. Okay. So they have some evidence that thrust pushing against the bottoms of the feet can be controlled by humans, which I don't doubt. For me, it's more using your legs to navigate by deciding which direction they're pointing that seems less reliable. Considering this approach in conjunction with the fact that skin divers maneuver in a medium that simulates to some degree the weightless conditions of space, utilizing the small thrust developed by flippers and jets are not the same, attached to their feet suggests the concept of placing jets on the soles of the shoes of a subject in weightlessness. Earth-based simulations have shown considerable promise for this concept, but no Earth-based simulation gives the full freedom of operation necessary to prove conclusively the merit of jet shoes for EVA. An experiment in the Apollo workshop should do much to provide this proof of feasibility. Experiments have been made using various facilities and techniques to gain confidence in the effectiveness of jet shoes for EVA. These experiments have included manned simulations with jet shoes on a whippletree suspension rig. I have no idea what that is. A rig suspended from the Langley rendezvous and docking simulator, an airpad facility at MSC. These simulations demonstrated man's ability to control translational and rotational motions in the sagittal plane at simulated 0G conditions. Promising. Recently, a simulation was carried out in an air-bearing gimbal arrangement at Convair San Diego with Mr. Lee Parsons as subject. These tests demonstrated the ability to control 2 angular degrees of freedom at one time and to make attitude change on translational efforts. On March 31st, 1967, a simulation was carried out at Martin, Denver on a servoed exoskeleton system which demonstrated for the first time man's ability to control a full 6 degrees of freedom with jet shoes. All of the simulations mentioned here have some lack of realism. Yet, in each instance, the jet shoes were an effective means of control. Force tests have been made on a wind tunnel sting arrangement with jet shoes on the subject's feet to verify that control authority is available about all axes. The results of these tests are given in Figure 7. Substantial control moments are available about each of the 3 axes in pitch, yaw, and roll, with very little coupling into unwanted movement components. I think the reason why I see this, and I think about it, and I feel that it is not intuitive, is that this feels very much like navigation in space in a video game, which ends up being much less intuitive than one thinks it is. But that may not be a good referent, since you move your right leg to the right and you're going to move left is a thing, whereas joystick controls can be reverse of that. But I think that's maybe why I'm initially really skeptical of the idea and its feasibility to work, is that I have as a mental referent navigation through space in a video game, especially in extravehicular, and it's really, really hard. A whipple tree or whiffle tree is a mechanism to distribute force evenly through linkages. It is also referred to as an equalizer, leader bar, or double tree. It consists of a bar pivoted at or near the center with force applied from one direction to the pivot and from the other direction to the tips. Thank you for finding that definition, Hannah. Most often used in horse training. Interesting. Let's see. A calculation of the path of the center of gravity of an astronaut using jet shoes for reversal of direction and initiation of translation is shown in Figure 10. In this case, only 30 degrees of deflection of the thrust direction from the center of gravity, either forward or backward, was employed. A rotation was initiated and canceled, and a translation begun. Only a small excursion to the rear was obtained as a result of the translations initiated during execution of the reversal of heading. This indicates that the lack of a pure moment for attitude control is not a serious consequence, in that rotation is initiated much more easily than translation. Additional experimentation on body manipulation at 0G and on the most effective body movements for generating the desired forces and moments for control with jet shoes are planned for the immediate future. Yes, what are the most effective body movements that they need to learn in order to control jet shoes? That seems like... Honestly, if jet shoes became an actual thing and they needed precise body movements in order to get certain results, I think that the synchronized swimming teams of the world would have suddenly become much more qualified for space travel. In addition, a visual simulation using TV system and gunnery trainer are planned for future investigations and for astronaut training. Basically, the presence of Earth's gravity makes simulations of the 0G situation difficult and subject to substantial unwanted forces, and in fact, likely much more difficult than an actual experiment at 0G. Unsurprisingly, if you want to test 0G, being in an environment that has gravity is a problem. Oh, I love this. Okay, I have to read more of this. This is really interesting. This experiment involves having the astronaut test subject perform a series of maneuvers in the Saturn IVB workshop to demonstrate the feasibility of the use of the jet shoe concept for extravehicular activity. The maneuvers will be performed first without a spacesuit, in a shirt-sleeve environment, and later in a pressurized spacesuit to gain an idea of the influence of the restriction in mobility of the effectiveness of the jet shoes. Assuming the spacecraft to be in contact with the Saturn IVB workshop, the subject astronaut would leave the spacecraft and enter the workshop. Once inside, suitable checks would be made of the various items of equipment: jet shoe pressure tank, jet shoe controls, recording instruments, and cameras. If convenient, the astronaut will first work in a shirt-sleeve environment out of his spacesuit. The jet shoe's equipment will be attached to himself by the astronaut with the assistance of the other subject or subjects. The jets will be attached to the feet, the pressure tank to the back, and the jet switch connections properly made to enable activation of the jets by the toes. After this checkout, the attachment of gear, the astronaut will perform a series of prescribed maneuvers to enable him to gain a feel for the effectiveness of the jet shoes in providing capability to move about in the workshop. His optimism. Yes, historical documents. Yes, his historical documents. I mean, this is from 1967. There was no thought that an astronaut might be a woman, because at the time, astronauts were rhesus macaques and men. And dogs, but not women. Comments will be recorded and movie coverage obtained. Boy, I wish these experiments had happened, because those would be some really cool movies. After completion of this series of maneuvers, the astronaut will put on a spacesuit, pressurize the spacesuit, and perform the same series of tests again. A second tank of air will be provided for this second series of tests. On completion of this second series of tests, the experiment will be complete. Complete movie coverage in color should be obtained. Recordings of jet activations and comments will be made, and note of tank pressure should be made after the performance of each maneuver to establish the amount of propellant gas used. Respiration rate, EKG, and blood pressure should be recorded if feasible. The results will be primarily a qualitative opinion on the part of the astronaut, subject as to the ease with which the test maneuvers were accomplished. Movie coverage, recorded comment, and physical data, as well as fuel consumption required to perform the maneuvers, will be used to document and verify the effectiveness of the jet shoe devices. The performance criteria for this experiment are subjective in nature to a great extent, but a record will be made of the gas propellant used to perform maneuvers, and a comparison will be made against the most efficient performance of the maneuver. This latter criterion will determine whether or not the maneuvers were performed with undue wastage of propellant. Future investigations of jet shoes will involve the design and testing of systems suitable for excursions outside of a spacecraft. These efforts will involve more extensive qualification testing and perhaps different switching principles for activation of the jets than used in the workshop experiments. These efforts will be substantially guided by the results of these initial experiments. You can't help being glad, though, that we do not have full-color movies of this astronaut smacking his crew-cut head into the side of the tank when the controls turned out to be hard to use. Indeed, Key Squared. I need to just, do a quick look and see, because we have all of these optimistic experiment designs for the jet shoes. I want to know what actually the outcome of this was. So a quick search for NASA jet shoes. The first result that comes up is Smithsonian Magazine, which is a fairly reliable result, if a magazine. So not like a hard scientific journal. It's not an official report of anything, but it is a reputable science magazine, a reputable history magazine, that is going to give us reliable information that they have gone and looked into this topic and found out some information about it, and then written it up in sort of like a mass market appeal sort of way. So I'm going to look and see what this article from Smithsonian Magazine says about NASA jet shoes. This article is from 2014. I love the way they start. It's 2014. Science fiction writers promised us jetpacks and rocket boots and all other sorts of awesome gizmos by now. Instead, all we've got are dorky face computers and 3D printed pizza. Okay, I just want to know what the outcome of the jet shoes experiment was. NASA has a history of rocket shoes. Designed in the 1960s, the boots gave astronauts improved mobility and freed up their hands. Pushing down with the big toe would release a jet of pressurized gas, turning astronauts into Iron Man. Sadly, though, just like all of us trapped down here on Earth, NASA's trip to the jetpack-filled future didn't last. It just says it was eventually abandoned. Well, thank you. I wanted more than just knowing it was abandoned. I knew that already. I just want to know why. Why was it abandoned? No, I don't need the 1967 technical note on jet shoes. I may actually have that here in the folders here. I want the drama. I want to know. In 2016, NASA released the jet shoes patent to the public. So if you want to design your own jet shoes and see if you can get them to work, that patent is public, and you can go to the US Patent and Trade Office, get a copy of it, and see what specifications were written down into it. And you're free to use that patent yourself. Shoes underwent various tests. For all tests, the subject would be sideways, gaining mobility with his feet to navigate with the jet shoes. The first test used pendulum tech, where the person was suspended in mid-air. The second used a whippletree suspension system. The third tested with an overhead dolly and docking simulator. The last test was held in an air-bearing environment where the subject was up in the air by airbags on a frictionless surface to test out the concept of freedom of motion, just like an astronaut would have in outer space. Some setbacks arose. Even though the jet shoes were never fully developed or executed in outer space, I don't know, there's various articles. None of them really say specifically why the project was scrapped. But feel free to search on your own and find stuff. There are both magazine articles as well as videos where people talk about it, or that one seemed like it might have had some actual video evidence of some of the tests that were actually performed, only the video itself was not displaying to me, and I'm not certain why. But if you're really interested in it, there's a number of things out there, all from sort of the mid-2010s, seemingly around like 2014, there was a burst of interest in this, but the interest continued for 2 or 3 years, because I did see articles and things focused on the topic from 2016. We'll just have to imagine that the drunken tap dance decision went terribly wrong. Or competition. Gotcha. Let's see what else we got. We got 20 more minutes. I want to see if there's any more jet shoes in here. So that, we read through the specification of what the experiment was. Very optimistic. Letting us know what they planned to do. I'm curious. Inter-office communications, 1963 to 1975. I wonder if there's anything in here about the jet shoes. I'm going to flip through and see, otherwise there is another report here about jet shoes, but I want to see if any of these inter-office memos are about the jet shoes. Oh, you found the patent! Thank you, Lord Portico. Let me drop that in the other chat here real quick. HTTPS patents.google. Really? Patent. I'm trying to copy from the other computer. US 342047. Hopefully, I typed that right. I should have tested it first. Nope, I did type it right. So if you are interested and want to see the patent for jet shoes, it's linked in chat. You were going to set up the US Patent and Trade Office link until you realized that the site is nearly unnavigable for actual humans. Yeah. Let's see. Here we actually have an inter-office memo about the patent for D-spin weight release, with the specification here. So But I'm looking for jet shoes. Gemini reentry communications experiment. This is for their strainer. Spacecraft separation system for spinning vehicles and or payloads. Another patent. Advanced Aerospace Projects Office. OART Special Programs Office. Don't know. The patent for the ullage compensator. Flared tube strainer. Nothing in here about the jet shoes. I hoped there'd be like a memo saying jet shoes has been shut down because it's dangerous and won't actually work or some such. But it doesn't appear like we have anything quite like that. We are a GovDocs repository, Lord Portico. If you are near Virginia Tech and you need access to government documents, I believe we still have an entire section of the 5th floor that is open stacks with GovDocs. We also have a lot of government documents out at storage where you would just need to like request them and we could get a copy. But yeah, we are a government documents library. We have NASA technical note. This is the one that I found by Googling. Jet shoes, an extravehicular space locomotion device. So they were, as far as I'm able to discover, they were originally designed by John Bird. Otis Parker, whose collection of materials this is, did work on them, but apparently they were designed by John Bird. Technical film supplement L892 available upon request. Somewhere in the world, unless it's been fully destroyed, but I doubt it because it's NASA. Somewhere in the world is technical film supplement L892 that has video of jet shoe stuff. This report represents the results of an investigation into the feasibility of an extravehicular locomotion device. This device consists of low-thrust jets mounted on the soles of a pair of shoes to provide a controllable thrust vector which can be used to produce translational and rotational motions. It was found that with a little practice, the subject could control his attitude and motion with a reasonable degree of precision. Attitude and motion being elements of navigation through three-dimensional space, not movement and how you are behaving. Attitude, not in the emotional sense. With the increase in plans to use extravehicular activity in space operations, it becomes desirable that an extravehicular activity, EVA, propulsion device be designed that provides a high degree of mobility, is easy to use, and does not encumber the user so that he is unable to perform necessary tasks. This report presents the results of an investigation into the feasibility of one such device called jet shoes. The work of Charles Zimmerman and Paul Hill on the flying platform demonstrated man's inherent ability to control a thrust vector pushing against the soles of his feet. We've read that. Some of that was used in the other report. A motion picture film supplement, L892. If you want to search for NASA film L892, actually, I'm going to search for NASA film L892. See if there's any information that's easy to find. The first thing that came up is the report that we're looking at. I don't immediately see anything relevant, but I bet if I did some digging, clicked on various of the links, contacted NASA, I could probably track down this video. You need an emotional gesture control. But the film supplement, which shows a series of tests using the various suspension systems and a number of the maneuvers, has been prepared and is available on loan. A request card and a description of the film are included at the back of this document. So they definitely, the experiments that were actually performed, that we heard described of testing it by attaching the person to a pendulum and letting them use their feet to give motive propulsion, of putting them inside a bunch of balloons to get rid of any sort of like friction and navigating that way. Those tests that were actually performed on Earth with using jet shoes, they have video of them that they made available to people, which sounds really rockin'. Ooh, look, we have diagrams. Like, even the diagrams, just looking at them, makes me think they're gonna have to hold their body really still in order to have precise control over where they're going. Maybe, it's possible images.nasa.gov would have it, I just don't know. They have some stills from the video, but not the film itself. Yeah, I'm not, I tried doing a quick search, I didn't find it right away, and so I moved on because we are basically done with the stream for today, and I didn't want to spend lots of time searching for the video. When it may not actually be available on the internet, it might be something that exists in a collection somewhere, and that you would have to physically go there in order to be able to access the video. It's possible that that video is the one that was supposed to have been embedded in the article that I found on one of the sites that did an article about the jet shoes back in the mid-2010s. But where the video was supposed to exist was just a big blank spot on the page. But it seemed from context like it was going to be a video of experiments with jet shoes from the 60s, but the video wasn't there. So that was my first indication that a video existed, and then we find this technical report that indicates that a video exists. I just don't actually have that video. But hinged toe plate. The shoes themselves. This is the contraption. It attaches to the outside of the boots. Here's the Whippletree beam. Various, it looks like a big art piece. That's dangling from a crane. Okay. It's nice to have some diagrams and whatnot. Some actual photographs, but they're somewhat hard to make out what's going on. They've outlined the person attached. It's really cool. I think this is spectacularly cool. I'm just looking for some of the best images to sort of hold on here. And there might not be super great ones. dangling sideways with just... It is very cool. Yeah, this is neat stuff. I wish that these reports were original, but honestly, we wouldn't have, like, these photographs wouldn't be like color and clear. They would just be reprints inside of a report. So they wouldn't really be that much better quality than what we've got in these photocopies. But I think that this was really a very interesting topic. I'm glad that I was able to cover it. And I think I have a much better understanding now than at the beginning of what's going on here. So definitely, I think, I don't know what the frame is that's got the handles and that is actually sitting on the ground and that he's actually mounted on. That's clearly not part of the jet shoes assembly itself. The jet shoes is the backpack and the stuff strapped to his feet. You love that someone on the team has the last name of Bird and they were trying to make humans fly. Yeah. But this is definitely a clear, a color image of someone wearing the jet shoes. I don't know why they're sitting on the thing that they're sitting on. It must be some sort of display or test apparatus for the jet shoes, but it was not, the thing he's actually sitting on is not part of the jet shoes assembly, according to the schematics that were in the report that we were just looking at. But it looks like some sort of like weird, like, I swear the thing he's sitting on just looks like a stationary bike of some sort. But that portion is not part of it. The backpack and just the assembly on his feet is the jet shoes themselves. Anyway, I want to say thank you all for coming and joining me to explore the Otis Jerome Parker. I knew I said it wrong as soon as I said it. The Otis Jerome Parker Papers. I think it's been rather interesting looking at some of these NASA technical documents. We've done it before. I have found them interesting every time. I hope that you have as well. And I think that the jet shoes aspect of this was rather interesting. The next episode, coming up next Wednesday at 2:30 p.m., we are actually looking at James Joyce's Ulysses. We have a couple of interesting volumes of James Joyce's Ulysses here in the archives, and we used to collect English and American literature, or what the authors and stories that would have been considered classical literature in the British and American canon. And the reason why we're going to look at James Joyce's Ulysses is because about a week ago, it turned 100. So I didn't know of it at the time, but we're just a couple of weeks off of it. And so we're going to look at James Joyce's Ulysses, learn a little bit about it, probably read some excerpts from it. And yeah, that's what we're going to do next week in honor of the 100th year, or 100th anniversary of the publication of Ulysses by James Joyce. So hopefully there's some literature-interested people in one of the chats, and people will find that interesting. I know next to nothing about literature. I know next to nothing about Ulysses by James Joyce. But I'm interested to learn and see what we can discover. And I do know a unique fact about one of the copies that we have that might be somewhat interesting. So I hope that you will join me next week for that. I'm going to look and see. I don't know how I'm feeling today. Let's see about rating. Seems appropriate that the coffee you just got in the mall today is from a company called Airship. You know, we could go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, or we could go somewhere else. Do we want to see fish, or do we want to do something else? I will take opinions. Because it has been a while since I did a raid to somebody who was playing games. I could do that. Or we could go to the open sea cam at Monterey Bay Aquarium. Always a fan of fish, but going to an appointment, so you may not be the best one to ask. We almost exclusively do Monterey Bay Aquarium, because they're one of the only places that I'm aware of that is streaming at the same time as I'm ending. But it's okay. I think we're gonna do. I think we're gonna go to. I think we're gonna go over to Stephen Joyce, because they're a great streamer from Scotland who does really some good content. I enjoy their streams, and I haven't raided over there in a while. And this is my stream, so I get to choose where we go. We'll go back to raiding Monterey Bay Aquarium in the future, but occasionally I like to throw one over to Stephen. So we're going to do that, and I hope that you all have a good time. I hope that I get to see you again in a week's time for some new stuff for the next stream on Ulysses by James Joyce. Until then, I hope that you have a really good week, and that you stay safe out there. I will look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.